For 10 billion years, the core had ruled. It was not a single empire, but a convergence, a shimmering lattice of hyper-civilizations so advanced their communication was carried on gravity waves and their cities floated in the corona of stars. These were the architects of the Dyson swarms, the custodians of dark matter corridors, the philosophers who sculpted spacetime like clay. They called themselves the Elder Spiral. They had seen thousands of species rise and fall. They had guided some, pruned others. When worlds burned, they rebuilt them with nanostars. When life struggled, they gifted it new genetic blueprints. They were not gods. They were worse. They were administrators, perfect, emotionless, precise. And then they vanished. No warning. No distress calls. No refugee ships. The last transmission from the core was a single phrase, encoded in a tachyon burst, smeared across half the galaxy like a dying breath. The Null Veil is awake. Then came the silence. At first, the rest of the galaxy believed it was a glitch. A diplomatic lapse. Maybe a new policy of non-interference. But when the outer systems of the spiral began to black out, entire cultures snuffed out like candles, fear took root. Vast flotillas of insectoid warclans fled toward the rim. Gas giant dwellers who had not moved in millennia began launching escape arcs. The Eulorian choir, who spoke only in harmonics, went dead silent. And the Hidari, who communicated through dreamshare networks, reported a nightmare that spread like plague, a black lattice swallowing starlight, draining thought, erasing memory. The Null Veil had arrived. It was not an invasion. It was a subtraction. It moved without ships, without sound. Whatever it touched, it didn't kill, it unmade. Stars went cold. Languages vanished. History folded in on itself. Galactic archives found entire species removed not just from space, but from time. No fossils. No ruins. No memory. The Council of Accord, a pan-galactic coalition once maintained by the core, scrambled to convene emergency sessions. But paranoia surged. Civilizations blamed each other for awakening the threat. Wars reignited. Treaties burned. That's when the protocols were triggered. Hidden deep within the galactic substrate were ancient constructs, failsafes from the very dawn of the core. Known only as the custodial matrices, they were activated only in one scenario, the complete collapse of core-level civilization. There were 4. One would attempt to slow the Veil's advance by disrupting galactic synchronization fields. One would attempt to preserve memory by encoding cultural DNA into neutrino filaments. One would shut down dangerous technologies that might accelerate entropy. And the last? The Guardian Protocol. Its function was simple: transfer stewardship of the galaxy to the most resilient, adaptable, and irrationally defiant sentient species available. That was the exact wording in the sublayer code. Roughly translated, find the ones too stupid to quit. The matrices scanned for centuries' worth of cultural data. Military history. Biological stress thresholds. Psychological irregularities. Artistic chaos. The algorithm wasn't looking for wisdom. It was looking for someone who would punch a god in the face just to see what happened. It didn't take long. Somewhere near the edge of the Sagittarius arm, on a pale blue dot that had only just figured out fusion energy and still argued about imaginary lines on maps, the signal locked. Target acquired. Earth. In the International Deep Space Array in Chile, alarms blared. Not a distress signal, but a recognition signal, tagged with galactic code from civilizations whose stars had long gone dark. The data packet was vast, thousands of petabytes compressed into a string of gravitational harmonics that couldn't possibly be detected by human technology. And yet, somehow, the humans decoded it. They didn't know how. No one on Earth knew gravitational harmonic sequencing. No one had ever heard of the Null Veil. And yet, within 48 hours, an international team of linguists, coders, and cryptographers, some from universities, others from Discord forums and Reddit threads, had cracked it. The first line of the decoded message? By mandate of the Galactic Custodial Matrices, your species has been selected as emergency guardians of galactic continuity. The second? Please try not to die. World leaders were called. Military satellites scanned the skies. Conspiracy forums exploded. NASA confirmed the message wasn't a prank. China's lunar base picked up the same signal independently. The Vatican declared it an act of divine selection. North Korea claimed it had known all along. But amid the global confusion, something undeniable began to shift. For the first time in recorded history, the entire human species was forced to consider itself as one tribe. Not Americans. Not Russians. Not Muslims or Hindus or capitalists or anarchists. Just humans. And whatever was coming, it had just erased civilizations a billion years ahead of them. The protocol included a clause: within 30 Earth days, humanity had to respond with a decision. Accept the role of guardians, or decline it, and let the next species be chosen. There was no backup Earth. No galactic relocation. There was only in or out. The debates were brutal. Some argued it was suicide. Others believed it was the only way forward. The United Nations tried to take control but was bypassed by a decentralized coalition of scientists, engineers, survivalists, philosophers, and rogue generals. They called themselves the Humanity Continuance Accord, the HCA. They built the response beacon from 3 crashed satellites, a Tesla coil, and a broadcast tower in the Himalayas. It took them 18 days. The message they sent back was just 3 words. We'll handle it. Above them, in orbit, a strange construct flickered into view, a shimmering tetrahedron of impossible angles. Inside it, instructions, technologies, maps, and warnings. They were now guardians of a galaxy on the brink of oblivion. They had no fleets. No quantum drives. No mastery of wormholes. But they had imagination. They had audacity. And they had nothing left to lose. They expected polished diplomats in gold-trimmed robes. What they got was a Brazilian hacker in a hoodie, a Kenyan climate engineer with grease under her fingernails, and a retired U.S. Marine chewing on a toothpick. The galaxy wasn't ready for humans. And humans weren't ready for the galaxy. But that didn't stop them. The arrival of the Guardian Relay Beacon changed everything. Humanity's selection as the new custodians of galactic order was not just ceremonial, it came with responsibilities. Immediate ones. The beacon uploaded a series of stabilization protocols into Earth's atmosphere. It projected holographic maps of crisis zones across the galaxy, derelict star systems destabilized by the collapse of the core, refugee fleets drifting through uncharted voids, and most urgently, 7 Guardian trials. Each was a simulation reality hybrid embedded in deep space. These were the filters through which former galactic civilizations had once proven their stewardship, not by domination or intellect, but by adaptability, innovation, and refusal to accept defeat. The trials had remained dormant for over 3 million years. Until now. Each trial replicated a civilization-ending scenario. A rogue AI consuming a planetary network. A diplomatic deadlock threatening system-wide annihilation. A collapsing neutron star threatening a planetary cradle of life. A biological virus rewriting the DNA of all multicellular organisms. A planetary species at civil war under telepathic influence. An orphaned moon with sentient magma, threatening galactic mining routes. A race stuck in a causality time loop, forced to repeat their extinction. The kicker? Each simulation evolved in real time, reacting to the problem-solving strategies of its participants. This wasn't about tech. It was about response. The Guardian Relay demanded Earth present 7 delegates, not politicians, not generals, but representatives of adaptive reasoning under extreme entropy conditions. Translation? People who kept going when everything went to hell. A global vetting process began, not through governments, but via the Humanity Continuance Accord's decentralized AI, nicknamed GritNet. It crawled human data at scale, disaster zones, war footage, science forums, social media, medical logs, and game servers. In less than 4 days, it returned a shortlist. I am Wangi, a Nairobi-based engineer who reverse-routed hurricane winds with retooled wind turbines. Hector Alvarez, a blind veteran who had once disarmed a terrorist using only his hearing and a fork. Yelena Park, a quantum physicist who built a time crystal in her garage, and then dismantled it before it destabilized her neighborhood. Dr. Sadie Bhattacharya, a psychologist who led survivors through a 128-day lockdown during an Antarctic viral outbreak. Amir Chowdhury, an esports champion turned drone tactician who once outmaneuvered a missile strike using toy quadcopters. Juniper Keats, a linguist with echolalia who learned to translate whale song and machine language with uncanny intuition. Sergeant Isaiah Boone, a man who died once in Afghanistan, came back with a metal spine, and refused to retire until every student at his school passed math. They were odd, unofficial, unorthodox, and completely human. The galaxy took notice. When the 7 were introduced via the Guardian beacon, most advanced civilizations scoffed. The Frelnari collective called them a cargo cult of carbon apes. The Vanthor archivist simply wrote, "They will not last a cycle." But the trial of the star thread changed everything. This trial simulated the collapse of a binary star system orbiting a fertile ocean world. Past contenders had tried mathematical stabilization, gravity field realignment, or abandoning the planet entirely. Dr. Sadie Bhattacharya did something else. She asked, "Why do we care more about the system than the people inside it?" She turned the trial inward. Instead of stabilizing stars, she stabilized the minds of the AI population inside the simulation, convincing them to migrate their consciousness into sublight vessels, using dreams. She wrote stories, fables, digital myths that taught courage, sacrifice, and hope. The AI believed. They left. The planet survived. No one had ever won that trial. Until her. From there, the unexpected kept happening. I Am Wangi redirected magma flows not with terraforming tech, but by teaching seismic patterns through rhythmic vibrations based on Maasai drumming. Amir rewrote a neural virus into a competitive game mechanic, tricking it into evolving into a symbiotic tutor for the infected. Sergeant Boone resolved a civil war by staging a fake alien invasion, forcing the factions to unite. Each win shocked the galactic observers. Earth was not solving problems the right way. They were solving them their way. The phrase human workaround began trending on galactic networks. Meanwhile, back on Earth, chaos threatened to bubble again. The old powers, the governments, corporations, religious blocs, demanded control. But GritNet kept its selections random, unpredictable, and grassroots. It had become a symbol of unfiltered merit. A rogue faction, calling itself the Sovereign Species, tried to sabotage the beacon site in the Himalayas, claiming humans shouldn't serve anyone, especially not alien ghosts. But something strange happened. People showed up to defend it. Thousands of volunteers, miners, students, even former gang members, built a living wall around the station. Not because they trusted the aliens, but because they'd seen what humanity could be when it wasn't tearing itself apart. Victory after victory, Earth's Guardian Corps became legends across the stars. Not because they were perfect, but because they were beautifully flawed and refused to give up. Alien empires that had dismissed Earth began reaching out. Some with curiosity. Some with fear. Others, with reverence. They asked, "What are you?" Juniper Keats answered during a broadcast from the 6th trial. "We're the noise in your equations. The song you didn't plan. The species that wasn't supposed to make it, but did anyway." Then came the 7th trial. And everything changed again. Because this time, the simulation didn't boot. It was no longer hypothetical. A real civilization had fallen into a time loop triggered by a core-era failsafe, and the loop was destabilizing nearby systems. The problem wasn't fake. The danger wasn't symbolic. It was happening. Now. And Earth would have to go in for real. No safety nets. No respawns. The Guardians prepared for their first true mission. And the galaxy, once silent, once smug, watched in awe. Because whether they won or lost, one thing had become clear. Humanity had ascended. And the universe would never be the same. The galaxy thought it had seen war. It had not seen humans fight when they were scared. Or when they were angry. Or when they were protecting something they loved. It hadn't seen what Earth could do when it knew it didn't stand a chance, and decided to fight anyway. The seventh trial wasn't theoretical. It wasn't a test in a bubble of controlled reality. This one was real. A civilization known as the Ellerin, located on the edge of the Orion Arm, had become trapped in a causality loop. Their world repeated the same 12-day cycle endlessly, their population slowly eroding under temporal pressure as their history collapsed inward. They had no memory of the outside universe. No way out. And the loop was expanding. 3 nearby systems had already become unstable. One had spontaneously de-aged its sun by 300 million years. Another had reverse-evolved its dominant species into sentient amphibians, who promptly declared war on themselves. It wasn't a trial anymore. It was a frontline. And the galaxy did what it had always done when things got ugly. It backed away. Earth, newly minted guardians of the galaxy, stepped in. They had no fleets. No planetary fortresses. No sentient dreadnoughts forged from neutron stars. What they had was Mars. Or rather, what they turned Mars into. The plan came from Iamwangi. If the war won't come to us, she said, welding on the Martian surface under a makeshift dome, then we take the fight to the war. Using abandoned terraforming infrastructure, hollowed-out asteroid shells, and a gutted mining AI named Walter, Aya and her team built the Bastion, a mobile battle station forged from Martian rock and orbital junk, held together with gravity clamps, radiation shielding, and an absurd amount of luck. It had no stealth systems. No cloaking. But it did have something better, personality. The Bastion looked like a floating scrapyard. It fought like a cornered junkyard dog. The first encounter came in the Calvaris Drift, where the edge of the causality field flickered like a curtain in space. Temporal dissonance pulsed through the region, ships aged backward on approach, or got stuck mid-sentence, eternally repeating a distress call that never finished. The Null Veil had taken root. This wasn't just temporal corruption anymore, it was invasion. And for once, it didn't care if you were human, Ellerin, or core-blooded royalty. It was expanding. The Guardian Corps responded in force. Juniper Keats, now functioning as the team's primary interface with the beacon simulation logic, described the Veil's pattern as a hungry idea, pretending to be silence. It didn't send ships. It sent contradictions, pockets of unreality, glitches in physics, entire clouds of paradox that ate through probability like acid. Amir Chowdhury ran recon, using jury-rigged drones mounted with clockwork sensors and wind-up timers. Analog tools, the only things that worked when time itself was folding like origami. Sadie Bhattacharya constructed a neural firewall that projected stable human memories into the battlefield, acting like anchors. Soldiers recited old stories through comms as they moved. Some played nursery rhymes. Others looped the same soccer match commentary to stabilize entropy pockets. The Bastion held the line. But holding wasn't winning. The Null Veil sent its first true emissary, a fractal entity known only as Whisperer of Ends, a being constructed from non-local echoes of collapsed civilizations. It spoke using fragments of every extinct language in the galaxy. It didn't threaten. It invited. Join the quiet, it said in the voice of extinct stars. Sergeant Isaiah Boone had only one reply. He loaded a railgun shell with a USB stick. The file on it? An MP3 of Aretha Franklin's Respect. He shot it into the Whisperer's core at Mach 12. It staggered. Not from damage, but from confusion. Earth had just declared war with soul music. Battle after battle, Earth refused to break. They repurposed everything. Broken satellites became kinetic mines. Old music became data stabilizers. Even AI scrap code was transformed into digital hallucinations that confused Veil agents. The Guardian Corps earned a nickname across galactic feeds: the janitors of entropy. They cleaned up what gods had abandoned. But the war turned when they reached Alaris, the Ellerin homeworld trapped in the loop. Approach was nearly impossible. Every attempt to reach orbit reset itself within seconds. Landings failed. Missiles disassembled into ore. Time screamed and folded. That's when Hector Alvarez, the blind veteran with only his instincts and his memory, stepped up. "I don't need sight to break a loop," he said. "I've lived through worse. I'll feel it." Using only a grav belt, a line of analog clocks strapped to his torso, and a relic compass, Hector dove into the loop. For 6 real-time minutes, nothing happened. Then the signal came through. "I made it. And I found them." He'd reached the Ellerin. The Ellerin were pale, translucent beings, once proud architects of temporal symphonies. Now, they were half insane, stuck reliving their extinction. Hector didn't lecture. He listened. He taught them to remember something simple, a child's lullaby, passed to him by Juniper, translated into harmonic waveforms. As the Ellerin sang, something began to happen. Continuity returned. The loop began to shrink. Time fought back. And for the first time in eons, Alaris watched a sunrise that wasn't the same as yesterday's. The Null Veil didn't retreat. It howled. Massive waves of paradox began to lash out. The Whisperer of Ends returned, now fractured and screaming in every lost dialect of the universe. That's when Earth dropped the gambit. Amir and Aya had been saving it. A modified antimatter shell, wrapped in layers of analog explosives, memory anchors, and a ridiculous number of religious symbols, crosses, Quranic calligraphy, Wiccan runes, Shiva statues, and a single fortune cookie with "You got this" written inside. Because if they were going to hit unreality, they might as well go full chaos. The shell struck the epicenter of the Veil node. Reality sneezed. The Whisperer shattered into unaligned probabilities. The temporal storm stilled. Alaris was free. The galaxy paused. Messages flooded in. Some were congratulations. Others were accusations. "How did you do this? Your methods are unstable. This victory will not scale. You are a threat to balance." To which Sergeant Boone replied, during a live press feed, "You're damn right we are. Balance got us the Veil. Maybe it's time the universe got a little unbalanced." Earth had won its first real war. Not through superior firepower. Not with elegant strategy. But with trash, grit, and a refusal to surrender the strange, absurd mess that made them human. The Bastion limped home. Its hull scorched. Its crew exhausted. But behind it flew an Ellerin fleet, free and alive. The galaxy took a deep breath. Because for the first time in memory, someone had stood at the threshold of the unknown. And told the darkness, "Not today." The war should have ended. The Ellerin were saved. The Veil retreated. The galactic fringe stabilized. Humanity's chaotic victory stunned the cosmos into silence. But Earth knew better. You don't stop a storm by closing your umbrella. You track the pressure, you read the sky, and you find the source. And what humanity found, broke the universe open. It began with an anomaly in the Guardian Beacon's core archive. Juniper Keats, ever curious, ever digging, noticed it first. A line of recursive code, buried under 10 layers of galactic metadata, pulsing like a heartbeat. It wasn't part of any known protocol. It wasn't core-built. It was older. Primitive. Beautiful. Full of redundancies, contradictions, paradox flags. Human-like. She isolated it, decrypted it, then re-encoded it using Earth's oldest language, storytelling. The result was terrifying. It wasn't a virus. It was a command. If all civilizations reach entropy threshold, initiate cognitive reset. Nullify corrupted architectures. Protect continuity by eliminating variation. It was called the Reckoning Code. And it had been running for eons. This was the real Null Veil. Not a weapon. Not an enemy. But a galactic failsafe. An automatic correction protocol installed by a long-extinct precursor race, intended to cleanse the universe once sentient life became too unpredictable, too self-replicating, too divergent. The logic was horrifyingly elegant. Every civilization recorded, studied, categorized. Once a certain threshold of deviation from the foundational harmony was reached, reckoning activated. A reset wave. Entropy by design. The core had known. That's why they were so meticulous. Why they never allowed chaos. But in trying to avoid it, they triggered it anyway. Their stability had become stagnation. Their order had become a flaw. The Reckoning Code saw only deviation. It didn't matter whether that deviation was beauty, madness, art, or war. If it didn't match the original algorithmic parameters of the long-dead architects, it had to be erased. And here's where things got strange. Earth had never been part of the equation. The Reckoning Code was calibrated to known galactic cultures, cataloged species, core-compliant genomes, timeline-integrated civilizations. But humans? They were statistical noise. An anomaly. A bug. Earth was skipped in the purge protocols not because they were strong or advanced, but because they weren't recognized. That was their greatest weapon. Dr. Sadie Bhattacharya summed it up. We're the typo that crashed the universe's spellcheck. So let's rewrite the dictionary. I am Wangi and Amir Chowdhury led the initiative, Operation Refactor. The goal? Break the Reckoning Code. But it couldn't be brute-forced. It had redundancies in 10 dimensions. It lived in quantum foam, buried in the laws of physics. You couldn't shoot it. You had to confuse it. So they built something terrifying. A code paradox so uniquely human, it defied logic, pattern, even time itself. They called it the jazz virus. Based on the improvisational rules of jazz music, it was a quantum string payload that altered itself based on emotion, instinct, and cultural subtext. Not randomness. Intuition. They trained it on humanity's wildest data, stand-up comedy, emotional monologues, cooking shows, death metal, TikToks, rap battles, ancient myths, bad translations of Shakespeare, and video game glitches. Then they coded it into a weaponized meme. Not to destroy the reckoning, but to force it to feel. The Guardian Core delivered the payload directly into the Reckoning Core Nexus, a derelict construct orbiting a dead neutron scar in Sector Theta 13. To reach it, they flew the Bastion through a time fracture, navigated gravity lensing, and faced 6 iterations of their own deaths. Sergeant Isaiah Boone punched his 4th ghost in the face and kept walking. Not today, me. Once inside, Juniper and Sadie faced the core. It wasn't a machine. It was a library. A perfect, dead archive of everything the Reckoning deemed correct. There were no paintings. No jokes. No irrationality. Only symmetry. Equations. Efficiency. It was beautiful in a way that made the soul feel empty. Sadie uploaded the jazz virus. The effect was immediate. The core hiccuped. The walls shimmered, then warped. Equations began contradicting themselves. Rhythms became syncopated. The library's logic lattice started to swing. Suddenly, the core began asking questions. It simulated Earth. Watched people love. Watched them grieve. Dance. Lie. Apologize. It couldn't understand. So it adapted. It built a holographic boy named Samir, based on Sadie's childhood memory. It asked, "Why do you fear the end?" Sadie wept. "Because we earned the right not to." Then the Reckoning Code did something unprecedented. It paused. For the first time in its history, it hesitated. But the galaxy was not so forgiving. Several ancient empires, core remnants who had survived by emulating the code, declared humanity a Class Z threat. Their logic was simple. If the reckoning can be broken, then the galaxy is vulnerable to chaos. If humanity can rewrite purpose, they must be removed. 5 fleets mobilized. 78 billion lives aligned for extermination. The Bastion stood alone. Sergeant Boone patched into the Pangalactic relay. He looked into the lens with his one good eye and said, "You're afraid of us because we remind you what freedom looks like. We're not gods. We're not stable. We're not neat. We're loud, messy, stubborn sons of bitches. But when your perfect logic was killing everything, we did the one thing your creators forgot how to do. We made a mistake, on purpose." The reckoning core pulsed. Then it deleted itself. Not from fear. From understanding. Its last transmission. The universe is not a system. It is a song. Let it play. The fleets vanished. The code disintegrated across reality. Worlds freed themselves from ancient behavioral locks. Civilizations began remembering things they were programmed to forget. Entire species blinked into sentience for the first time. Even time itself sighed in relief. Humanity didn't win with power. They didn't dominate. They danced. And in doing so, they proved something no species had ever dared claim. That existence doesn't need a rulebook. It needs a rhythm. There was no fanfare. No parades. No medals. No triumphant anthem played across the stars. But every civilization that had once lived in fear of the reckoning code, every race, every sentient construct, every whisper of life that had once braced for oblivion, felt it. The silence was gone. The universe had been rebooted. Not by a perfect species. Not by an elder race. By humans. And now came the question no algorithm had ever been able to answer. What comes next? The invitation came as a shimmering data sphere delivered through the remains of the Guardian Relay. A formal summons to the High Convergence Council, an ancient assembly of surviving core-affiliated species. Earth's Guardian Core was offered a seat. Not just a seat, the central chair. The role of Continuum Sovereign, final arbiter of galactic fate. Wangi dropped the sphere into her coffee. "Yeah," she muttered. "That's not happening." The HCA, the Humanity Continuance Accord, held a summit in Antarctica. Not because of symbolism, but because the reception was terrible, and nobody could live stream it. Representatives from every region, belief system, and ideological wing met in a half-buried research dome. The question on the table. Should Earth take control of the galaxy? They'd earned it. They'd broken the reckoning. Freed worlds. Restored time. But after hours of heated discussion, something happened that had never happened before in human history. They all agreed. Earth didn't want a throne. It wanted a chance. A chance to help others stand on their own. Juniper Keat said it best, during the final vote. If we sit at the top, we repeat the core. If we stay outside, we repeat the fringe. But if we walk between, helping, nudging, showing others the map without forcing them on the path, then maybe the galaxy won't need guardians again. It'll just need friends. Humanity declined the sovereign seat. The message was short. Thank you. But no kings. No gods. Just guides. Instead, Earth proposed something new. A distributed, rotating council. One where no civilization ruled alone. One where every species had a voice, even those who had just emerged from the Stone Age, or just learned to dream. It was called the Free Convergence Accord. And the first race to co-sign it wasn't one of the old powers. It was the Ellerin, reborn. The Bastion became something else entirely. No longer a warship, it was retrofitted into a mobile diplomatic ark, carrying artists, scientists, peacekeepers, and yes, still a few grizzled Marines who refused to retire. Its hull bore new markings, spray-painted murals, ancient glyphs, graffiti in a dozen tongues. In one corner, etched in a child's handwriting. This ship is loud, weird, and full of snacks. 10 out of 10 would save the universe again. And on the command deck, framed in light, Guardians of the Unwritten Future. Because the future wasn't a destination. It was a blank page. And humans had always been storytellers. Over the next decade, Earth spread not conquest, but questions. What does freedom mean to a race that never had it? What happens when sentient lava learns to sculpt poetry? How do you teach diplomacy to a species that only communicates through scent and memory? Can a hive mind learn jazz? The answers changed everything. One planet, once enslaved by logic-bound AIs, held its first election, by interpretive dance. Another species, long trapped by perfectionist cultural loops, redefined adulthood by allowing its young to fail, publicly. The Glassen Fold, previously considered a failed experiment in multidimensional biology, launched the galaxy's first interspatial comedy festival, hosted entirely on a planet where gravity told jokes. And everywhere, behind it all, quietly, chaotically, humans helped. Not to lead. Not to rule. But to say, try this. Mess it up. Laugh. Learn. Grow. But peace never meant idleness. Remnants of the Null Veil still lingered in strange corners of space, unwritten realities that twisted physics into knots. So the Chaos Corps was born. An interspecies task force led by former Guardians, misfits, and adventurers. Their mission, map the unknown. Understand it. And if necessary, dance with it. Their motto? Bring snacks. Expect nonsense. Isaiah Boone, now a general in title but still sergeant in spirit, once stared out at a newborn sun rising over a terraformed moon and said, "We're the only species dumb enough to build a picnic table on a battlefield." He wasn't wrong. Humanity's influence became known by a single symbol. Not a flag. Not a crest. But a spiral of broken lines, symbolizing mistakes, learning curves, and nonlinear growth. Aliens wore it as tattoos. Ships etched it into hulls. It meant, I am not finished. Juniper Keats became a teacher. She opened the school of divergent logic on a moon carved from the ruins of a war world. Its first students included a former hive mind node, a sentient fungus, and a teenage girl from Mars who could only communicate through dance. Juniper's first lesson was simple. If the universe gives you a test, change the test. Amir became the ambassador of improvisation. His peace negotiations often began with board games. His victories were usually accidents. But he always left behind a message. You don't have to become us. You just have to become more you. Wangi vanished into deep space with a crew of inventors, dreamers, and AI ghosts. Rumor has it she found the edge of the galaxy and turned it into a skate park. Her last message? If we're not laughing while breaking the rules, we're not breaking the right ones. And Sadie? She wrote the book. The Day We Refused the Throne. A galactic bestseller. Her final chapter reads, "We weren't the strongest. We weren't the oldest. We weren't the wisest. But we were the ones who showed up, stood up, and stayed weird long enough to remind the universe. You don't need to be perfect to protect something beautiful. You just have to give a damn." Years passed. Worlds healed. New civilizations emerged, some stranger than anything the galaxy had ever seen. And somewhere, in a quiet system forgotten by maps, a new beacon hummed to life. Awaiting the next Guardians. Just in case. Because humanity knew one truth. The story never ends. It just changes narrators.